Imagine for a second that you punch an enemy so incredibly hard that their literal soul just pops right out of their body.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it's just, floating there in midair. And instead of just ignoring it, you actually grab that glowing soul, you spin around, and you hurl it like a bowling ball into, like, 3 other guys and knock them all off a cliff.
I mean, it is an incredible mental image, for sure. But more importantly, it's an absolute nightmare for a physics engine to try and calculate in real time.
Exactly. But, that is precisely the kind of mechanical insanity that we are looking at today. We are taking a massive leap into how the next generation of games is, well, turning abstract, mythical lore into literal, measurable physics.
Right.
So welcome to the deep dive. Now, we received a very specific set of instructions from you, the listener, for this one. You asked us to focus exclusively on all the announcements from the massive 60-minute June 2026 PlayStation State of Play stream.
Which was incredibly dense, by the way.
Oh, totally. But you gave us 2 very strict rules for this. Absolutely no opinions, just facts. And do not mention any specific source websites or publications.
Which, I gotta say, it's a fantastic constraint. It really strips away all the internet hype and, the subjective hot takes. It forces us to look strictly at the architecture of what is actually being built by these studios.
Right. So we have a mountain of official event summaries, direct developer press releases, and these incredibly detailed game fact sheets just sitting on the desk between us.
Piles of them.
Yeah. Our mission is to tear through this 60-minute showcase and meticulously unpack the confirmed data, the mechanical features, the lore, and the release strategies. We aren't going to give you a review score. We're going to map out the foundational blueprint of the interactive entertainment industry for the next 2 years.
And what's fascinating here is that, well, when you strip away the flashy trailers, modern gaming showcases are astonishingly dense with hard data.
Yeah, they really are.
We are looking at a landscape where the supplementary documentation provided by these studios is just packed with mechanical specifics. By laying these announcements out on the table, we can actually see how different development teams are solving complex problems.
Right, like how they are manipulating game engines to do things that, quite frankly, weren't even possible 5 years ago.
Exactly, and exactly when they plan to deploy these projects to the market.
Okay, so let's jump right into the deep end because we have a staggering amount of ground to cover. I want to start with the 2 absolute heavyweights of the showcase.
The big ones.
Yeah, the properties that received the most airtime and the most detailed supplementary fact sheets. Both of these titles are doing something really fascinating. They are taking established blockbuster universes, bringing back returning characters, but completely upending the scenarios those characters are operating in.
They're changing the entire context.
Right. So first up, we have the official, undisputed confirmation of God of War Laufey.
This was undeniably the anchor of the presentation. I mean, the developers dedicated a full 15 minutes of the showcase strictly to this reveal, which, tells you everything you need to know about its scale.
The scope outlined in the fact sheets is just massive. The most critical fact to establish right away is that this is a brand new mainline entry.
Yeah, this isn't a small DLC.
No, not a bite-sized spin-off at all. It is being directed by Ariel Lawrence, and the press materials actually include an extended interview with Cory Barlog discussing the genesis of the project.
Which is great context.
But the biggest shift, the thing that completely recontextualizes the series, is the protagonist. We are playing as Faye.
Right, also known as Laufey.
Exactly. Portrayed by Deborah Ann Woll.
And we really have to talk about the timeline here because the chronological placement of this game is brilliant from a narrative architecture standpoint.
It's so unexpected.
It is.
Yeah.
The events of this game do not take place after Ragnarok. The text explicitly states that this narrative runs exactly parallel to the events of the 2016 series reboot.
Wait, so it begins?
It begins moments after her death.
Right.
And her funeral.
Which means, logically, while Kratos and Atreus are climbing the mountain to spread her ashes in the mortal realm, we are actively playing out her journey in the afterlife.
Precisely.
And the documentation goes into heavy detail about where she actually is. The data says Faye is trapped in a realm called the Everyone.
The Everyone. And the way the lore documents describe this place is incredibly specific. It is explicitly categorized as the afterlife of the gods.
Okay, let's pause on that.
Sure.
If this is the afterlife for gods, that fundamentally answers the biggest bangling thread from God of War Ragnarok, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. If we connect this to the bigger picture, Odin's entire motivation in the previous game was an obsessive, maddening pursuit to understand what happens to a god when they die.
Right, because mortal souls go to Helheim or Valhalla, but Nobody knew what happens to the divine.
Exactly. God of War Laufey is architected entirely around answering that exact question. Odin was looking for the everyone.
And what makes the everyone so wild from a gameplay perspective is that it isn't just Norse gods who end up there.
No, it's a massive convergence.
The fact sheets confirm that because all magic returns to this one place, it acts as a convergence point for multiple distinct pantheons. The initial enemy lists confirm Faye will be fighting Sekhmet.
The Egyptian god.
Yes, a very prominent Egyptian god. And Bexi, who the developers specifically note, is a Tibetan Buddhist god.
That is a staggering detail for the franchise's world building. But think about what that means for the combat engine.
Oh, mechanically, it's huge.
Right. Introducing entirely different mythological pantheons isn't just a narrative flavor. It is a massive expansion of the game's mechanical base tier.
Because an Egyptian god of war is going to have a fundamentally different combat rhythm.
Different attack silhouettes, different animation rig timings than, say, a slow, lumbering Norse troll. Faye is going to have to counter fighting styles that operate on entirely different internal logic.
She isn't going in completely alone, though. The materials list 2 confirmed companions that will travel with her.
Okay, let's look at those.
First, there's Frank, voiced by Jack Quaid. The description here is just amazing. He is a, quote, curious cosmic cube with an earnest disposition.
A literal geometric shape as a companion character. That's quite a departure from a boy with a bow.
Right. And then we have Rue, voiced by Perlina Lau. Rue is described as an enchanted ribbon guardian who is tasked with guarding a devastatingly powerful sword.
Okay.
Faye eventually earns the right to wield this sword, presumably after proving herself in some way. But let's get into the actual meat of how she fights, because the developers have laid out a very clear philosophy for her mechanics in these documents.
Yeah, the combat design documents emphasize 3 pillars for Faye. They are lethality, power, and fluidity.
Fluidity seems key there.
Absolutely. They detail a hyper-responsiveness in her control scheme, specifically noting her ability to transition seamlessly between ground-based combos and aerial juggling without any halting in the action.
They actually mention injecting some of the classic fast-paced DNA of the original Greek-era's combat into the modern close camera system.
Which longtime fans will certainly note.
But here is the mechanic that absolutely blew my mind. Because Faye is the golden hand of the Jötnar, and because she is physically standing in the Everyone, which is a place overflowing with raw magic, her innate soul-manipulating abilities are just cranked up to 11.
This is where we get to the bowling ball analogy you mentioned earlier, right?
Exactly. So the press release details a mechanic where Faye can strike an enemy with such overwhelming force that she physically detaches their soul from their body.
His soul is just knocked loose.
Just floating there. From there, the player has options. You can attack the soul directly to deal massive damage, or you can physically knock that floating soul into other enemies to open up area of effect combos.
This specific mechanic represents a fascinating evolution in the spatial design of combat encounters. Think about what is happening under the hood of the game engine here.
Right, I really want to unpack this. If Faye detaches a soul and uses it to hit other enemies, are we essentially looking at a billiards physics system that has been layered directly over a traditional hack-and-slash melee system?
Based on the parameters outlined in the developer text, yes, that is precisely the mechanical reality.
That's incredible.
When you detach an enemy's soul, you are effectively asking the game engine to spawn a secondary, highly volatile physics object directly into the center of a chaotic combat arena.
So it has to do all that math instantly.
Yes. The engine suddenly has to calculate the mass of that soul, the trajectory based on the angle of Faye's strike, the velocity, and the collision detection as it ricochets into the hitboxes of other moving enemies.
Which completely changes how you manage a crowd of enemies.
Completely. I mean, in a standard brawler, crowd control is mostly about managing the proximity of physical bodies. You keep the enemies in front of you, you dodge when they get close.
Right. Basic spacing.
But if you have this soul detachment mechanic, you are actively calculating geometric angles. You are looking at a group of 3 enemies and thinking, well, if I hit this guy at a 45-degree angle, his soul will bank off the wall and stagger the 2 guys behind him.
It turns standard brawling into a high-speed spatial geometry puzzle.
It's an incredibly elegant way to take a deep lore concept, you know, the golden hand of the Jötnar manipulating souls, and translate it into a measurable, tangible physics variable that the player can manipulate.
And it guarantees that playing as Faye is going to feel fundamentally different from playing as Kratos. You aren't just swinging an axe. You are managing a battlefield of ricocheting energy.
It demands a completely different situational awareness.
Okay, let's shift gears to the other massive heavyweight from this showcase. This one also expands an established universe, but it grounds it in a much more recognizable, albeit gritty, reality.
Right.
We finally have hard, confirmed data on Marvel's Wolverine.
And the most important piece of data right out of the gate is the release date, September 15th, 2026.
Put it on the calendar.
It is being developed by Insomniac Games in collaboration with Marvel Games, and the pre-orders actually went live the moment the showcase ended.
The narrative synopsis they provided gives us a very sharp outline of the game's initial structure.
We aren't dealing with Thanos or Galactus here.
No, not at all. Logan is tracking a group known as the Reavers. The documents describe them as a heavily armed cybernetic militia who operate as guns for hire. And their current contract involves actively hunting and capturing mutants.
The client funding this operation is confirmed to be Bolivar Trask.
Right, the billionaire industrialist. And his motivation here is driven by a fanatical, almost zealot-like belief in human superiority. What I find really interesting is the specific world state the developers outline in the press materials.
Yeah. The societal context.
They make a point to note that in this universe, mutants are largely living in the shadows. They are terrified of these hunter groups, while the broader, everyday society is completely oblivious to the fact that mutants even exist.
This is a crucial narrative decision. It establishes a highly localized, covert thriller atmosphere. It's essentially a shadow war. Furthermore, the text confirms that to stop Trask, Logan has to rejoin a group called Team X, which is a mutant task force he apparently walked away from 3 years prior to the start of the game.
And Team X brings some major characters into the fold. The big reveal is that Jean Grey is confirmed to feature prominently.
That's a huge inclusion.
The documents describe her as a powerful telekinetic and the emergent, de facto leader of the mutants who have been captured by the Reavers.
Did the footage show anyone else?
Yes. The footage they showed also gave us confirmed teases of Sabretooth, Mystique, and a massive high-speed set piece where Logan is riding a motorcycle down a highway, tearing trucks apart and fighting these massive cybernetic brutes at 80 miles an hour.
So the action scale is definitely there. Let's dive into the documented gameplay mechanics, because Insomniac has provided a very detailed look at Logan's combat loop.
Okay, let's break it down.
They specifically name a few of his core techniques, like the tornado spin and the bull rush. This implies a heavy focus on closing the distance quickly and utilizing area of effect crowd control.
Makes sense for Wolverine.
But they also confirm the existence of team-up critical strikes with Jean Grey.
Which tells us that AI companion mechanics are going to be a core part of the gameplay loop, at least for certain sections of the game.
Right.
You aren't just fighting alone, you are syncing up your melee brawling with her telekinetic crowd control. But the absolute center of the combat economy is the rage meter.
Yes, the resource management aspect of Wolverine's combat.
The documentation states that every successful attack you land, every perfect parry you execute, and every kill you secure builds up Logan's rage meter. Now, you have a choice on how to spend this economy.
So it's a tactical choice.
Exactly. If you hold on to it and push the meter to its absolute maximum limit, you can unleash what they are calling Rage Tier 3.
Rage Tier 3.
The press release describes this as a stylized, monochromatic explosion of savagery inspired by Marvel Comics' Black, White, and Blood series.
So the entire screen essentially washes out into stark black and white, with only the bright red of blood remaining visible.
Exactly. It's a massive visual shift.
Yeah.
But if you are getting overwhelmed, if you are bloodied and battered and on the verge of dying, you can choose to spend that exact same rage meter on a mechanic called Last Stand.
Okay, what does that do?
This allows you to instantly activate his healing factor to survive grievous, otherwise fatal damage.
It is a brilliant distillation of a classic game theory dilemma. Do you bank your generated resources for an overwhelming ultimate offensive attack, or do you hoard it as a defensive failsafe?
But wait, I have a major question about the data here, specifically regarding that visual filter.
Sure, go ahead.
If Rage Tier 3 shifts the entire game into a monochromatic black and white style, does the documentation indicate if this fundamentally changes his hitbox data or his invulnerability status?
That's a good point.
Because if the screen is black and white, how do you see the red or yellow UI flashes that typically warn a player of an incoming unblockable attack?
That is a phenomenal question regarding UI and UX design. If we look strictly at the text provided by Insomniac, Rage Tier 3 is defined primarily by its visual shift, its allowance for, quote, stronger attacks, and what they term an explosion of savagery.
Right.
Crucially, the document does not mention invulnerability during this state.
Wait, really? So you can still take damage while in Rage Tier 3?
Conversely, look at the description for the Last Stand mechanic. It explicitly states its mechanical purpose is to activate his healing factor to survive grievous body damage.
Okay, I see.
Therefore, synthesizing this data, it strongly suggests that Rage Tier 3 is a pure damage output multiplier paired with a stylized screen filter. It is purely offensive. The Last Stand is the distinct mechanical trigger for defensive survival and health regeneration.
They serve entirely separate functions within the game's economy.
Exactly. And as for the UI concerns regarding unblockable attack warnings in a monochromatic mode, it is highly likely the engine will preserve the specific neon UI colors on top of the black and white filter to ensure the player can still read enemy telegraphs. Otherwise, activating your ultimate move would paradoxically make you blind to enemy threats.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. You separate the offensive burst from the defensive recovery, and you force the player to make a tactical choice every single encounter.
It's all about resource management.
Now, before we move on from Wolverine, we need to break down the purchasing data, because the pre-order information they dropped is incredibly granular.
They really spelled it all out.
They did. The standard edition of the game is priced at $69.99, and the digital deluxe edition is $79.99.
And in modern gaming, the exact contents of that $10 difference are heavily scrutinized. The documentation is very careful to specify exactly what that premium acquires.
It acquires a massive suite of exclusive cosmetics and, crucially, early unlocks. The fact sheet names 5 exclusive suits included in the deluxe edition. They are Incredible, Savage, Age of Apocalypse, Night Hunt, and New Leather.
A lot of comic history there.
Oh, for sure. It also names 5 exclusive claw variants you can equip. Smooth-edged, hollow blade, thick, serrated spine, and tapered.
Now, it is vital to note that the developers explicitly state in the fine print that these suits and claw variants are purely cosmetic.
So no stat boosts.
No stat boosts. A serrated claw does not change your frame data or alter the hitbox of your attacks compared to a smooth claw. It is purely an aesthetic model swap on the character rig.
However, the deluxe edition is not entirely cosmetic. It also includes 3 additional technique points right at the start of the game. For comparison, pre-ordering the standard edition grants you just 1 early unlock point.
Which means the deluxe edition directly alters the initial progression curve of the campaign.
Exactly. You are starting the first hour of the game with access to 3 more combat techniques than a standard player. From a mechanical perspective, it accelerates your access to the wider combat toolset.
Right, effectively shortening the tutorialization phase of the game where you are usually limited to basic light and heavy attacks.
It's a small but very tangible mechanical advantage in the early hours.
It allows experienced action game players to bypass the slow ramp-up and immediately start experimenting with complex combos.
All right, we're going to pivot sharply here. We are stepping away from the high-action, superhero, and mythological brawlers, and we are going to plunge into the deep end of interactive horror, suspense, and narrative branching.
A very different kind of tension.
Absolutely. The showcase dedicated a massive chunk of time to establishing atmosphere and outlining some incredibly complex decision trees.
The horror genre is undergoing a fascinating mechanical evolution right now, and the titles showcased here perfectly illustrate how developers are moving beyond simple jump scares and into deeply systemic psychological pressure.
Leading the charge in this space is Until Dawn 2.
The sequel.
The core facts from the press release. This is launching on the PS5 in 2027. It is being developed by Firesprite Games, taking the reins from Supermassive, and they are very clear that this is a standalone sequel.
So no prior knowledge needed.
Exactly. You do not need to have played the 2015 original or even know who those characters were to understand this new narrative.
The narrative data provided introduces us to a completely fresh cast. The setup is brilliant. We are following a crew of ghost hunters who run a wildly popular, highly lucrative paranormal TV channel called Dead True.
But the key detail, the hook that makes this so interesting, is that the press release explicitly states this crew has never actually seen anything supernatural in their entire lives.
Not once.
The scares they are famous for, the viral clips, they are entirely staged. These characters are professional fakers. They are actors playing a part for internet clout.
Which sets up a beautiful, dramatic irony.
Right. Because they secure a massive deal with a major television network. And they travel to an abandoned, remote tropical island to shoot a fully funded, high-budget episode.
And things go wrong.
Oh, completely. As you would expect from the genre, they arrive on this island and encounter actual, centuries-old supernatural horrors that are very real and very hungry for vengeance.
The materials also confirm a returning element that ties it back to the original game's framing device.
Oh, the Doctor.
Yes. Dr. Hill, the menacing psychiatrist played by Peter Stormare, is reprising his role. This strongly suggests that his direct-to-camera psychological evaluations, which dynamically reacted to the player's choices and fears in the first game, will return in some capacity to analyze the player's behavior here.
Now, let's look at the mechanical data, because this is where Fire Sprite is doing something really innovative. The famous butterfly effect decision system, where a small choice early on can lead to a character's gruesome death hours later, is confirmed to return.
A staple of the series.
But the documentation highlights a fascinating evolution in how the game calculates survival. It states that the survival mechanics are now tied directly to character relationship management, but with a highly modern twist.
Yes, the developer text provides very specific examples of the types of choices you will be forced to make. The system tracks traditional interpersonal drama.
Like what?
For instance, deciding whether to maintain scandalous, secret affairs that could detonate the group's trust if discovered, but it also tracks professional exploitation.
Meaning?
You will have to decide whether to push your terrified colleagues to their breaking point purely for the sake of getting good footage for the TV show.
Okay, this is what I want to dissect. If these characters are professional fakers whose entire livelihood depends on manufacturing scares, and they are suddenly thrust into a real survival situation, well, but the mechanics still require you to make decisions based on gathering content for their show. Are we looking at a game engine that is essentially tracking a dual layer of statistics? Is it measuring their performative on-camera persona against their literal biological survival instinct?
Based on the systemic parameters outlined in the source documents, that is the only logical conclusion. The game must employ a bifurcated dual-axis tracking system.
Okay, how does that work mathematically?
Let's think about this like a graph. On the x-axis, you have traditional survival horror affinity metrics. Does character A trust character B? Are they angry? Are they bonded? This dictates if they will, say, pull each other up from a cliff edge.
Right, standard narrative branching stuff.
Right. But on the y-axis, you have a metric for their professional success, or what we might call the content value of their actions. The tension the developers are mechanically enforcing is the conflict between these two axes.
It's like trying to take the perfect Instagram selfie while a bear is actively charging at you.
Exactly.
Your brain is caught in a loop between vanity and literal fight or flight survival.
That is a perfect analogy. The game engine is presenting you with a choice. Do you make a decision that lowers a character's physical safety, like sending them into a dark basement alone, because it dramatically raises the content score of the TV episode you are supposedly filming?
That's so devious.
It is. The engine is calculating survival based on how the player balances the performative demands of internet fame against their baseline biological imperative to stay alive. It is a brilliant, highly cynical way to quantify modern social dynamics and content creation within a survival horror framework.
It completely updates the slasher movie trope for the 2020s.
Yeah.
You aren't just trying to survive, you're trying to monetize your own survival.
Precisely.
Moving on from narrative horror, the showcase also dropped some incredibly firm data on several other suspense titles. And in doing so, they established a release window that is frankly terrifying from a business perspective.
This is where looking at the raw dates on the calendar reveals a lot about industry strategy.
Let's look at Silent Hill, Townfall. The core fact provided is the release date, September 24th, 2026.
A very specific date.
The showcase included a new story trailer that gave us our first documented, undeniable look at the specific monster designs for this new entry, moving away from the abstract teasers we've had previously.
And following closely in that same dark, psychological vein, we received an update on a mysterious game simply titled Ill.
Ill is scheduled for 2027. The source materials we have don't provide a ton of mechanical detail, but they describe it factually as purposefully grotesque.
The imagery is focused on intense body horror.
Yeah. There is no firm release date beyond the year 2027, but the documentation clearly positions it as one of the most viscerally disturbing titles currently in the pipeline.
But the most significant piece of data in this entire suspense segment doesn't have to do with monster designs or body horror.
No, it's about the calendar.
It relates entirely back to that specific September 24, 2026 release date you just mentioned for Silent Hill. Because Silent Hill, Townfall is not the only major, highly anticipated thriller releasing that day.
Not even close.
Yeah.
The showcase confirmed in plain text that Control Resonant, the massive sequel to the acclaimed supernatural thriller, is also releasing on September 24, 2026.
The exact same day.
Two massive, atmosphere-heavy thrillers, both relying on tension, mystery, and dark environments, dropping on the precise same calendar date.
It's unprecedented.
From a purely factual business analytics standpoint, this establishes a highly competitive zero-sum release date for the thriller genre.
It is a remarkable data point. Usually publishers spend millions of dollars in market research to avoid exactly this scenario.
Right. You don't want to cannibalize your own potential sales by launching next to a competitor who is targeting the exact same demographic.
No, you want a clear runway.
But the publishers here have looked at the data, they've looked at their financial quarters, and they have decided not to blink. They are placing these two major properties in direct head-to-head competition for the exact same consumer wallets on a single Tuesday in September.
What this tells us mechanically is that both development teams are incredibly confident in the distinct identity of their games.
How so?
Well, Silent Hill is banking on pure, paralyzing psychological horror, while Control is banking on high-octane, supernatural action thriller mechanics. But the demographic overlap is undeniable. It highlights the sheer density of the upcoming release calendar. There simply aren't enough weeks in the year to keep these heavyweights separated anymore.
And as we'll see later in the breakdown, September 2026 is going to be an absolute bloodbath for consumer spending.
Oh, absolutely.
But before we get to the rest of the calendar, let's shift our focus to our next major grouping. We are moving from single-player narrative survival into the fighting ring.
The competitive scene.
We have confirmed mechanics, rosters, and structural data for the newly announced competitive multiplayer titles. And the absolute centerpiece here is Marvel Tucon, Fighting Souls.
The primary data points for this title establish an incredibly aggressive rollout strategy. The game is releasing on August 6, 2026.
Very soon.
The core gameplay loop, as stated in the documents, is built entirely around 4v4 fighting mechanics.
Which is huge.
Yeah.
Not 1v1, not 3v3 tag, but full 4v4 team compositions.
It's a lot of characters on screen.
They unveiled new key art by the legendary illustrator Yuki Kato, and the composition of that art heavily emphasizes the 4v4 structure by showcasing distinct team leaders standing at the forefront of their respective squads.
And if players want to test the netcode and mechanical balance themselves, the documentation confirms a playable demo will be available at EVO Las Vegas starting on June 26, 2026.
That is an immediate turnaround. From a massive global announcement directly to hands-on, high-level testing in the most critical competitive fighting game scene in the world in less than a month.
It shows immense confidence.
That shows immense confidence in the engine's stability, yeah. But let's dig into the roster, because the bulk of the documentation for this title was dedicated to detailing the fourth official team joining the game, officially designated as the Knights of Doom.
The character choices and the voice talent here are top tier.
The team composition is fascinating. As the name implies, it is led by Dr. Doom, who is voiced by Sung-Won Cho.
Excellent casting.
Under Doom's leadership, we have Magneto, voiced by James Arnold Taylor, Green Goblin, voiced by Steve Blum, and Carnage, voiced by Kellen Goff.
A powerhouse team.
Now, the press release spends a lot of time detailing their narrative motivations. For instance, Magneto has rejected peaceful coexistence in favor of absolute mutant supremacy, and Carnage has been broken out of a maximum security imprisonment in the Raft.
But we need to look past the narrative.
Right. We need to unpack the mechanical data, because the way these characters play sounds incredibly disruptive.
Let's analyze the character mechanics exactly as they are documented, starting with Magneto. The text states that his core gameplay loop involves turning the battlefield into a weapon by hurling large objects at his opponent.
Pretty standard for the master of magnetism.
Yes, but the crucial mechanical detail follows. The document notes that when these thrown objects strike the opponent or the ground, they shatter into magnetic debris. And this debris remains on the stage permanently. Magneto can then use his subsequent skills in conjunction with that scattered debris to drastically enhance his attack power and range.
Okay, stop right there. What does this mean for high-level competitive play?
It's game-changing.
If Magneto's debris permanently litters the floor of the stage after every projectile attack, It sounds less like a standard fighting game fireball and more like stage hazard manipulation.
Exactly.
He is actively turning the static arena itself into a dynamic variable that opponents have to constantly navigate around.
That is exactly what is happening in the engine. He is fundamentally altering the collision geometry of the stage over the course of a 3-minute match.
Wow.
If you are playing against Magneto, you aren't just watching his character model to read his attack animations, you have to watch the floor. You have to monitor where the debris is located, because stepping near it means his next attack could be unblockable or have twice the range.
It's like fighting through a minefield.
It means fighting Magneto isn't just about managing the distance between two fighters, it's about managing real estate. He forces you to fight for control of the physical space of the arena.
That is terrifying in a competitive setting. Next up, we have Green Goblin. The text states he operates from an aviator-like combat suit and spends the majority of his time riding his bat-shaped glider.
So he's airborne.
Mechanically, the documentation highlights his extreme high-speed movement and a massive variety of projectile weapons, specifically naming razor bats and pumpkin bombs. He is explicitly designed for unconventional, tricky aerial assaults to disrupt grounded enemy tactics.
Which introduces a heavy Z-axis element to the combat.
Right.
While fighting games are technically on a 2D plane, a character that can hover and attack from the top of the screen forces the opponent to constantly split their defensive attention vertically, entirely bypassing traditional low block strategies.
And then we have Carnage. The data here outlines a highly aggressive, health-draining mechanic that sounds incredibly frustrating to play against.
It sounds punishing.
His attacks utilize bladed arms and far-reaching symbiote tendrils. The press release states that landing specific hits with these tendrils places the enemy into a temporary status effect called a symbiote-infested state.
Status effects in fighting games are always volatile, but this one is particularly severe.
While the opponent is infested, Carnage's skills are dramatically empowered. The fact sheet explicitly states this allows him to tear through defenses and drain enemy health, even through their guards.
Wait.
It allows for overwhelmingly one-sided assaults.
We need to underline how massive a mechanical advantage that is. The core defensive mechanic of the entire fighting game genre is the block.
Yeah, holding back.
If you hold back, you mitigate damage. What the developers are describing here is a status effect that entirely bypasses the fundamental rules of the game's defensive math. It isn't just chip damage. It is active health draining through a block.
So if you get infested, you literally cannot just turtle up and wait it out.
Exactly. It forces the opponent to play entirely evasively. You have to run away. It fundamentally changes the pace of the match from a back-and-forth exchange of blows to a desperate game of tag until the status effect wears off.
That's wild.
It's a brilliant way to capture the chaotic, relentless nature of the Carnage character in the raw frame data of the game.
Now, the documentation also revealed the overarching narrative justification for all of this fighting. They revealed the main villain driving the story mode.
Yes, the champion of the universe, voiced by Sean Kenan Elias Reyes.
He is described as an elder of the universe who has lived for billions of years. He travels the cosmos with someone referred to as the promoter.
And his goal.
His entire motivation is looking for worthy opponents. If he arrives at a planet and its inhabitants fail his challenge of the champion tournament, he annihilates the planet.
By stakes.
Earth is his next target, which provides very clean, comic book logic justification for why heroes and villains are suddenly forming teams of 4 to beat each other up.
The developers also used this showcase to reveal a variation of a previously teased stage, which will serve as the official home stage for the Knights of Doom. It is designated as the night version of Marvel's New York.
The documentation stresses that this night version contrasts sharply with the daytime version and is packed with specific, hidden Easter eggs for eagle-eyed fans.
If we synthesize this stage data with the Magneto mechanics we discussed earlier, we see a factual, documented shift in fighting game design toward highly interactive, lore-dense environments.
Right, moving away from simple backgrounds.
Historically, fighting game stages were just static, painted backdrops behind a flat, invisible plane where the actual math of the game happened. But here, the stage is an active participant. The environment can be broken down, manipulated, and utilized. The geometry matters.
It's a huge evolution for the genre, demanding much more processing power from the hardware. Okay, let's keep this momentum going. We're moving into an area that directly connects the advanced mechanics of modern games to how developers are utilizing brand new technology to entirely rebuild classic franchises.
The remasters and reimaginings?
This is where we look at the reimaginings, remasters, and engine upgrades.
The anchor for this section of the documentation is a major, highly anticipated franchise revival. Tomb Raider, Legacy of Atlantis.
The hard facts first. The release date is confirmed for February 12, 2027, although the documentation does include a caveat that it will launch on February 13th in certain regions like Japan, Asia, Australia, and New Zealand due to time zone differences.
Important logistical detail.
It is being co-developed by Crystal Dynamics and Flying Wild Hog. The most critical technological detail is that it is built from the ground up on Unreal Engine 5.
And we have two distinct retail editions listed. The Standard Edition for $59.99, which includes a pre-order Survivor outfit, and a Deluxe Edition for $69.99.
Which adds what?
That adds 48-hour early launch access, a Parisian fugitive outfit, and a post-launch DLC story pack.
But let's talk about the engine shift, because the mechanical changes documented here are profound. The press release describes this as a complete 3D reimagining of the 1996 original game.
The word reimagining does a lot of heavy lifting in PR speak, but they provided a very specific architectural example of what that actually means.
Yes, they specifically highlight the famous Peru Lost Valley level. The documentation explicitly states that the level design has been transitioned from linear, self-contained rooms into open, semi-connected environments that the player can traverse and approach from entirely new angles.
This represents a fundamental root-level rewrite of the game's traversal logic.
Explain that.
Let's look at the history. The 1996 original Tomb Raider was built on a strict, invisible grid-based system. Lara's movements, her runs, her turns, her jumps were calculated in precise, block-by-block mathematical increments.
Oh, I remember that.
You had to count your steps to ensure you hit the edge of a platform exactly on the grid line to make a jump.
It was essentially a rhythm and math game disguised as an action-adventure game.
Precisely. But moving the entire architecture to Unreal Engine 5 and opening up these environments into semi-connected spaces means the developers have completely abandoned that grid logic. They are utilizing modern, fluid, physics-based traversal.
Which changes how the player thinks about the space.
Completely. It changes the core interaction from mathematical puzzle solving, calculating exact distances and button timings, to environmental intuition.
It becomes instinctual.
You see a ledge, you push the analog stick toward it, and the animation blending in Unreal Engine 5 calculates the distance dynamically and adjusts Lara's leap in real time. It is a massive structural and psychological change hiding behind the simple phrase 3D reimagining.
And we see a very similar yet technologically distinct shift with our next title, Rayman Legends Retold.
The release date for this one is locked in for October 1st, 2026. Like Tomb Raider, it is billed as a 3D reimagining, but notably, it is being built entirely on Ubisoft's proprietary Snowdrop engine.
The feature list in the fact sheet is extensive. The game includes 4-player couch co-op, a completely re-recorded soundtrack by the original composers Christophe Herral and Grant Kirkhope, and fully voiced characters for the first time in the franchise's history.
That's a lot of new content.
They also confirm a mysterious new realm to explore, 4 brand new musical rhythm stages, and the return of the incredibly popular Kung Fu competitive minigame. Oh, and if you buy the Deluxe Edition, it actually includes a full, standalone copy of Rayman Origins, Enhanced Edition.
That is a very dense package, but again, the core visual and mechanical hook we need to analyze is the shift from a strictly 2D plane to a 3D engine.
Right, and the developers are very explicit in the materials about how this works. They state that the game breaks up the 2D perception by bending the playground and tilting the camera dynamically as you run through the levels.
Which implies a huge shift in the math.
Logically, I want to break down the math here. If the camera is physically tilting in a 3D space, and the ground is curving away from you, does this mean the game's hitboxes are now operating on a Z-axis rather than a traditional XY 2D plane?
Yes, that is the inescapable mechanical reality of what the Snowdrop engine is doing here. In a traditional 2D Rayman game, collision detection is strictly a matter of height and width, the X and Y axis.
Are you touching the spikes, yes or no?
Exactly. But if the Snowdrop engine is physically bending the playground and tilting the camera angle to show depth, the character models and the physical obstacles now possess actual volume.
Even if the gameplay still feels like a traditional side-scroller.
Exactly. Even if you are just holding right on the thumbstick, the engine must now calculate collision on the Z-axis. It has to measure depth. Therefore, the underlying mathematics dictating whether a jump over a pit is successful or whether a punch connects with an enemy have completely changed to account for that spatial depth.
It's just working so much harder in the background.
It is a much more complex, processing-heavy calculation taking place under the hood to ensure the 3D physics still feel as tight and responsive as the classic 2D sprite logic.
It's wild how much computational power goes into just making a game feel like you remember it feeling. Next up in our remasters section, we have concrete data on a pair of classic hack-and-slash action titles, Onimusha. The Way of the Sword is officially confirmed for September 25, 2026.
And importantly, for players who want to test the mechanics immediately, a playable demo is available right now.
Which is great.
The latest trailer provided firm visual confirmation of the iconic Mount O stage and specifically highlighted the boss fight with Shuten Doji.
We also saw a full, extensive feature trailer for Dynasty Warriors 3 Complete Edition Remastered, which meticulously detailed all the historical campaigns and character rosters contained within that massive package.
A lot of nostalgia there.
Following that, the showcase pivoted to updates on two legacy vehicle-based franchises.
Yeah.
Is Combat 8. Wings of Thieves is launching on October 2, 2026. And the documentation makes a very specific note that pre-ordering the game includes a direct port of the PS2 classic Ace Combat 0, the Balkan War, as a digital bonus.
The inclusion of legacy titles as pre-order incentives is becoming a highly documented trend for publisher retention strategies. We also received factual confirmation of a project called Stuntman Hollywood.
Oh, no.
This marks the return of a highly specific, very punishing, objective-based stunt-driving franchise.
And I want to highlight the mechanics of Stuntman because it is incredibly demanding. The press materials remind us that this is not a racing game.
Yeah, not at all.
You are not trying to come in first place. It is about executing highly precise, incredibly dangerous vehicular maneuvers on a rigid, unforgiving timeline set by a movie director.
Precisely. You have to hit a ramp at exactly 65 miles an hour while dodging an explosion that triggers on a half-second delay. It is essentially high-speed, physics-based puzzle solving, where the penalty for failing the puzzle is a spectacular car crash.
All right, we are moving into our final major grouping from the showcase. We are concluding this factual breakdown by looking at the periphery of the industry. Brand new standalone IPs, updates to massive live service economies, and structural additions to subscription catalogs.
Let's start with the standalone spin-offs and the brand new IPs. The documents reveal a game titled Bancho the Chef. This is an all-new standalone prequel to the massive indie hit Dave the Diver.
That's a fun expansion.
The narrative follows a young version of Bancho traveling across Asia to learn complex culinary techniques from master chefs.
We also have the official announcement of Kimori, which is slated for 2027. The developers categorized this strictly in the press release as a yokai possession action game.
The mechanics sound interesting.
The documented mechanics state that players take on the role of yokai hunters. You must track and hunt these mythological spirits in a modern urban setting. And upon defeating them, you physically absorb them to gain their specific supernatural abilities for combat and traversal.
So you become what you hunt.
It's a very literal interpretation of the monster hunting formula. Then we have a title simply called The Lost Wild. The materials confirm this is a dinosaur-focused survival title, though the mechanical details remain incredibly sparse at this stage.
The data regarding live service and co-op expansions, however, is much more robust and tells us a lot about market shifts.
Let's look at Dune. Awakening. The documentation confirms this highly anticipated title is getting a brand new, fully offline single-player mode that will launch simultaneously with the PS5 version of the game.
A huge change.
The developer text specifically notes this mode might appeal to players if the massive multiplayer online element isn't their preference.
This is a vital, incredibly telling piece of strategic data.
Right. Let's unpack the business logic here. Dune. Awakening was initially pitched and built as a massive, brutal, pure survival MMO.
Correct.
But looking strictly at the data provided here, the decision to spend millions of development dollars to engineer a standalone single-player mode specifically for its console debut implies a major shift in strategy.
It's a pivot.
It strongly suggests that their internal market research data showed the pure MMO concept simply wasn't strong enough to capture the console demographic, necessitating a massive mechanical pivot late in development.
The facts show a distinct, highly tailored approach to capture the console hardware market. Historically, console player bases have overwhelmingly favored single-player, narrative-driven experiences over pure sandbox MMOs where other players can ruin your progress.
Yeah, cultural players want a story.
Building a single-player mode is a clear, calculated reallocation of development resources designed to broaden the game's total addressable market on that specific hardware platform. They are hedging their bets.
It's a fascinating pivot. We also have data on No Rest for the Wicked. The documentation confirms the game is officially exiting its early access period and launching its 1.0 version on the PS5 in October.
October again.
The fact sheet describes it as a brutal, cooperative, top-down, Souls-like action RPG developed by the team behind the Ori platforming series.
Additionally, the ongoing live service shooter marathon received a new trailer detailing Season 2, which was accompanied by an announcement of a limited price discount to lower the barrier to entry for new players.
And speaking of lowering barriers to entry, for the MMO crowd, RuneScape. Dragon Wilds, a new cooperative title in the long-running franchise, was announced for PS5.
The launch strategy here is key.
Crucially, the release data shows this is launching directly into the PlayStation game catalog for premium and extra-tier subscribers on day one. It is completely bypassing the traditional $70 retail purchase funnel.
This is a pure acquisition strategy. They are prioritizing immediate player population over initial unit sales, hoping to monetize that massive user base through microtransactions later.
Get him in the door first.
Right. We also saw a brief visual teaser for an action game called Phantom Blade Zero, with the documentation confirming that a full 20-minute story and gameplay deep dive is scheduled for later this summer.
Finally, we have the confirmed additions to the Retro Classics catalog for premium subscribers. The official list provided by the publisher includes the rhythm cult classic Kidua Man, the physics-based action game Psyops, the Mindgate Conspiracy, and the PS2 action RPG Onimusha, Dawn of Dreams.
Now, before we wrap up, I want us to step back and look at the macro picture.
Okay, let's zoom out.
If we synthesize the sheer volume of release dates provided across all of these segments, a highly significant and frankly alarming pattern emerges on the calendar.
You're talking about the autumn cluster.
Yes. Look strictly at the release window from late September to early October 2026. According to the facts we just laid out, you have Silent Hill, Townfall, and Control Resonant launching on September 24th.
Both of them, yeah.
You have Onimusha, The Way of the Sword on September 25th. You have Rayman Legends Retold on October 1st. You have Ace Combat 8 on October 2nd. And you have No Rest for the Wicked dropping its 1.0 launch sometime in that exact same October window.
That is 6 major, heavily marketed titles clustered within roughly an 8-day window.
Objectively speaking, that highlights an intensely volatile market density for that specific financial quarter. From a data perspective, it indicates that publishers are aggressively, almost desperately, targeting that narrow late Q3 corridor.
Why that specific week, though? Why not spread it out?
They are trying to establish their active player bases and secure consumer wallets right before the traditional late November holiday rush, which is typically dominated by massive annual shooter franchises like Call of Duty.
Oh, so they want to beat the rush.
They want to get out ahead of the behemoths. But in doing so, they have created a traffic jam of epic proportions. Consumers only have so much disposable income and so much free time. When 6 games launch in 8 days, the mathematical reality is that they will cannibalize each other's sales. It is going to be a financial bloodbath for whoever blinks last.
It is going to be an absolute gauntlet. Okay, we have reached the end of the documentation. We have analyzed the mechanics, the engine shifts, and the market strategies. Let's run down the rapid-fire timeline of confirmed dates one more time, just to remind you of the factual density of everything we just mapped out.
The timeline begins in the competitive scene. The Marvel Toucan. Fighting Souls demo drops at EVO on June 26, 2026, ahead of its full retail release on August 6th.
Then the superhero action hits with Insomniac's Wolverine launching on September 15th, 2026.
Yeah.
Then we crash headfirst into that incredibly dense suspense and remaster window we just discussed.
The traffic jam.
September 24th brings both Silent Hill, Townfall, and Control Resonant. Onimusha drops on the 25th. October 1st brings the engine shift of Rayman Legends Retold, followed the very next day by Ace Combat 8 on October 2nd.
And stretching out into the following year, we have the Unreal Engine 5 rebuild of Tomb Raider. Legacy of Atlantis anchored on February 12, 2027, with Until Dawn 2, Kimuri, and Ill all confirmed for release windows within that same year.
With this timeline completely mapped out and the underlying mechanics fully exposed, you now have the exact factual data you need to decide which physics systems, which universes, and which release windows you actually want to invest your time and resources in over the next 2 years.
But before we officially conclude, I want to leave you with one final thought to ponder, a thought that connects back to our very first topic today.
Laufey.
Consider the everyone from God of War Laufey. We discussed how the developer documentation explicitly states that this realm is where the flow of magic returns, trapping dead gods from Egyptian, Norse, and Tibetan mythologies together in one physical location.
Right, the grand convergence of all the pantheons.
Think about the implications of that from a purely world-building perspective. If all of these wildly different mythologies, born from entirely different human cultures across the globe, share the exact same endpoint for their dead gods,
Does that logically imply they all share the exact same origin point?
it suggests a unified theory of mythology, a single primordial source of divine magic that eventually splintered off into the distinct pantheons we know today. It's a massive philosophical concept, a theory of everything, hiding in plain sight within the physics mechanics of an action combat game.
A single overarching structure where all the chaotic data of the universe eventually ends up in the exact same place. It really makes you wonder what other massive secrets are hiding right in front of us, buried in the raw data of these press releases, just waiting for the engines to render them. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.